Fred Hill has become one of the most talked about names tied to the disappearance of Summer Wells. Over months and years, his public statements have cycled through vivid claims, contradictory versions, and moments of apparent bravado about what people will accept as truth. That pattern has pushed him to the center of online debate, and for good reason. When someone repeatedly offers specific allegations about where evidence can be found or who might be responsible, those words demand scrutiny. But scrutiny is not the same as acceptance. Responsible reporting separates what a person says from what independent verification confirms. In Summer Wells' case, Hill's claims, especially his recurring assertion that Summer was boxed and buried under another grave in Morrison Cemetery, are serious, testable, and fraught with consequence if they prove false. At the same time, the fact that two other individuals later repeated similar details raises a question investigators must take seriously. Is there a grain of truth buried among repeated falsehoods? Or is this simply the echo chamber at work, where a dramatic claim is amplified and picked up by others who then repeat it as if they'd known it themselves? Observers hear three patterns in Hill's public presence. First, specificity. He gives places, descriptive details, and sometimes names. Specificity is never neutral. It commands attention because it suggests anything from first-hand knowledge to plausible inference. Second, contradiction. His accounts change, sometimes in meaningful ways, and sometimes in ways that undercut earlier claims. Third, performative admission. On occasion he has said, in effect, that he could fabricate a story people would believe. That last element is perhaps the most damaging to his credibility. If a witness or tipster openly admits the capacity to invent information for attention, investigators have to treat everything he says as suspect until corroborated by independent evidence. Yet investigators must also keep an open ear. Unreliable sources sometimes reveal accurate fragments, whether through guilt, a desire to manipulate, or an unconscious need to unburden. The painstaking work of detectives is to find those fragments and test them, not to assume a person's honesty or guilt based solely on their temperament or social media persona. Why does Fred's voice land so heavily in public discourse? Part of the reason rests in the vacuum that surrounds the Summer Wells case. After intensive searches, thousands of tips, and years of public attention, the case has produced little in the way of physical evidence. When a case appears stalled, the public often gravitates toward new claims that look actionable, a cemetery name, a specific section, a marker to check. Those details are easily photographed, reshared, and discussed in the viral economy of modern true crime attention. The consequence, however, is twofold. If the claimed specifics are true and can be quickly verified, they offer a rare route to closure. If false, they distract investigators, re-traumatize the family, and can damage the reliability of genuinely useful community reporting in the future. That is why law enforcement's response tends to be careful and procedural. They cannot treat every viral claim as equivalent to an evidentiary lead without due process. Fred's statements should also be understood in the social context of modern content creation. He has been associated with people who document and discuss the case online, channels that gain viewers through dramatic statements and the promise of revelation. That connection means his words are more likely to travel quickly and widely. In a media ecosystem where engagement drives reach, a bold, unverified claim can attract immediate attention. This magnifies both the potential help and the potential harm the claim creates. For investigators, the presence of such a social media dynamic is a complicating factor. Tips that arrive through formal channels and are accompanied by verifiable records, timestamps, photos with metadata, eyewitness contact details, are easier to prioritize. Tips that circulate online without such documentation require different handling. They need verification without creating the kind of public pressure that pushes police into premature actions. Another layer complicating the public reaction is Fred's personal history. Media coverage and public records suggest he has had legal troubles in the past. Some of that material has circulated online and been highlighted by critics as evidence that his claims are not trustworthy. From a purely investigative standpoint, a person's criminal history is not dispositive of their truthfulness on any given point. People with problematic backgrounds sometimes provide crucial, truthful leads. Others use the media spotlight for attention or to manipulate narratives. Good investigators sort claims by verifiability, not by the moral profile of the claimant alone. The public, however, often lacks that nuance. To many viewers, criminal history is an immediate reason to discount a source. That instinct is understandable but incomplete. There's one more factor worth stressing: the emotional damage of false or unverified claims. For the Wells family, and for families in similar situations, each new, loud allegation is like reopening a wound. A claim that points to a burial can send family members through profound grief in minutes. Even when a public claim is made in the name of finding truth, it can function as a cruelty if it's untrue. For journalists and content creators, ethical considerations should weigh heavily in deciding what to amplify. For consumers of online material, the appropriate reaction is to demand verification before amplifying further. If you have first-hand, documented information, original photos with metadata, contemporaneous notes, a direct eyewitness willing to provide contact information, deliver it to law enforcement. That's the difference between a rumor and evidence. The pattern of repeated narratives, where a single sensational claim is echoed by others later, can have multiple explanations. It may mean independent witnesses saw the same thing. It may mean a small number of people sharing a narrative influenced others to adopt the same language. It may mean someone has fabricated a narrative that others repeat either deliberately or because they are convinced by persuasive rhetoric. Parsing that requires the basic tools of investigation: establishing timelines, testing the original source's location at the relevant time, examining whether the second and third sources had access to the original material, and checking for corroborating physical or digital records. From a public safety perspective, how should authorities respond? The ideal sequence is clear and constrained by law and evidence practice. 1. Collect the tip and log the details. 2. Verify the credibility of the source to the extent possible using background checks and corroborating statements. 3. Seek non-invasive checks such as cemetery records, plot purchase histories, and ground-penetrating radar if legal authority and probable cause justify it. 4. Use cadaver dogs or other forensic tools where appropriate. And 5. If multiple independent indicators suggest disturbance, secure a warrant and conduct a forensic excavation under controlled conditions. Each of those steps must be documented meticulously so that any evidence obtained holds up in court. That process is slow and appears opaque to the public, but it's designed to protect both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of individuals. Fred Hill's shifting narrative has consequences that reach well beyond the noisy swirl of social media. When a person repeatedly posts vivid, changing claims about a high-profile disappearance, those posts don't just exist in isolation. They change the work investigators must do, they reshape public feeling, and they can either push a case forward or push it back by diverting limited resources. First, consider the practical burden on investigators. Every specific allegation someone makes requires logging, vetting, and, if it has any plausible anchor, checking. That might mean calling the tipster, asking for details, verifying where the person was at the relevant time, running records checks, comparing the claim to existing timelines, and if there's any corroboration, deploying field teams for non-invasive checks. Those steps are routine but time-consuming. In a complex, years-long case like Summerwell's, detectives already work through thousands of tips. A single persistent source who offers dramatic, unverified locations or scenarios can force investigators to reprioritize. A detective who might otherwise be retesting a piece of forensic evidence or re-interviewing a witness now has to spend hours determining whether this new claim has traction. That's not a slight on investigators. It's how responsible policing works, but it does mean the public should understand that dramatic social posts have real operational costs. Second, there's the emotional toll. For the family and close community, every public claim about a burial, discovery, or suspect is a reopening of grief. If a claim later proves false, the emotional damage done to the family is not easily repaired. Repeated false leads can also erode public trust. When communities are urged to help chase viral tips that turn out to be dead ends, people grow cynical. That cynicism undermines cooperation with future, legitimate investigative requests. Further, the spread of sensational claims can foster harassment and threats against people named, sometimes wrongly, in viral posts. In short, unchecked amplification can transform true crime interest into active harm. Third, false or unreliable claims create a legal and evidentiary risk. If the public begins to treat unverified online statements as fact, evidence can be unintentionally contaminated. Civilians rushing to a claimed site can disturb the very traces investigators need: soil layers, small fibers, footwear impressions, or even microscopic DNA, before properly trained personnel can document and collect them under chain of custody procedures. That contamination can render otherwise probative evidence useless in court. Additionally, repeated public accusations against named individuals, when unproven, expose content creators and sharers to defamation risks. Responsible handling of allegations is not only ethical, it's legally prudent. So what should happen instead? For law enforcement, the pathway is relatively well defined. Document the tip, verify the source to the extent possible, run cross-checks against known data, and where non-invasive checks are warranted, use targeted tools, public records checks, property ownership lookups, security camera requests, or remote sensing technologies such as ground-penetrating radar, GPR. If these steps produce indicators that merit further action, investigators obtain the necessary legal authority, warrants, and proceed with controlled forensic work, cadaver or human remains detection dogs, careful excavation, laboratory testing of any recovered biological material, and rigorous documentation of chain of custody for all items. This stepwise, court-admissible approach protects both the integrity of the evidence and the legal rights of anyone involved. For the public and social media communities, the most constructive role is restraint and verification. If you have genuinely first-hand, verifiable material, a photo taken at the time with original metadata intact, a contemporaneous message or recording, or a direct eyewitness willing to speak confidentially to police, pass that information directly to investigators through official channels. Don't post raw allegations and uncorroborated assertions to a public forum first. Doing so risks contaminating evidence, spreading fear, and harming potentially innocent people. If you're a content creator covering the case, put verification before velocity, label unverified claims clearly, avoid implying guilt, and encourage viewers to submit tips directly to authorities rather than to the comment thread. How do investigators and the public evaluate credibility in practice? A few factors matter: the specificity and verifiability of the detail. Does it tie to a physical place with identifiable markers? The consistency of the account over time, the source's access or motive, did the person have proximity to the scene or a reason to lie? And any associated evidence, time-stamped photos, independent witness corroboration, physical traces. Tipsters who offer precise, testable leads should be prioritized for verification. Those who offer grand but vague claims warrant a lower priority until they produce verifiable anchors. It's also worth acknowledging an uncomfortable but real truth. Unreliable narrators sometimes carry kernels of truth, and credible-looking witnesses sometimes lie. That's why investigators do not accept or reject information on face value. They translate statements into investigative hypotheses and then test them against independent evidence. The translation from claim to corroboration is the essential work of justice, and it requires patience, method, and sometimes the unpopular discipline of saying, "We cannot confirm that yet." Finally, a brief word about media responsibility. Sensational headlines and unverified scoops may drive clicks, but they also shape the social environment in which investigations proceed. Responsible reporting foregrounds official guidance, distinguishes between allegation and evidence, and avoids amplifying content that could hinder an investigation or re-traumatize victims' families. When media do their job well, they pressure authorities for transparency while still allowing proper investigative processes to unfold. Fred Hill's statements, whether ultimately helpful or harmful, are now part of the public record. The right response is neither blind dismissal nor uncritical amplification. It is a careful, evidence-based approach. Log the claim, test it, and only after corroboration treat it as actionable. For viewers, the most effective contribution is to protect the chain of evidence, report verifiable information to investigators, avoid sharing unverified allegations, and demand that those who cover the case prize accuracy over speed. That balance is how rumor becomes evidence, and how justice, if it is to be done, stands on solid ground.